Hey guys, Bump here, bringing you this 10.1 Unholy Death Knight beginner rotation guide. This will be meant for all of you out there who's picking up the Unholy Death Knight for the first time in 10.1. By the way, congratulations, welcome, it's going to be an awesome ride. Alright, this is going to be end to end, so it's going to be, resources, core rotation, cooldown usage, Mythic plus, openers, the whole shebang, so that you can go in and understand exactly how you're meant to execute your rotation to maximize your DPS. We start out talking about the Unholy resources. So Unholy Death Knights have two primary resources. We have runes, those are little skulls you see below your portrait there, the green ones. You have 6 of them. They are spent on abilities such as Festering Strike, Scourge Strike. Once you spend a rune, it takes 10 seconds to recharge passively, and importantly, you can only recharge 3 at a time. So if you spend all 6, only 3 of them is going to recharge, and then the other one's going to wait for their turn. Spending runes also give you runic power, which is our second resource, at a rate of 10 runic power per rune spent. Runic power is spent on abilities such as Death Call, Epidemic, that kind of thing, and it's kind of like our spender. But it's not like we have a, the strong abilities coming from runic power or the strong one comes from rune. It's really a mix. So it's not like, one is better than the other. We get a natural gameplay loop because spending runic power has a chance to increase your rune recharge rate due to our passive runic corruption or empowerment. I can't remember which one is which. Anyway, essentially it means that there's a feedback loop that allows you to not run out of resources, We also have kind of like a secondary resource when it comes to Festering Wounds. This is debuff we put on our enemies. We use Festering Strike to apply it. We use Scourge Strike to burst them. And it's kind of like, it forms the basis of our gameplay loop where we want to maintain those wounds on the target. Anyway, so that's our resources. In general, you want to prioritize spending runic power before runes. That's like general vibe. Generally, you don't want to overcap on either. As in, you don't want to have like 4 or 5 runes available. You don't want to go above 100 runic power. But if you have to choose, you choose to spend runic power over runes. Now let's move on to our core rotation, because I think you can quite simply view the Unholy Death Knight rotation as, this is the core rotation, this is what you do outside of cooldowns, and then you press the cooldowns and things change, right? So the core rotation in single target, we use Festering Strike, spending runes on that, to build wounds, Festering Wounds on the target. We use Scourge Strike to burst those wounds, and then we use Death Call to spend the runic power we generate using those first 2 rune abilities. Finally, we use Outbreak to apply our dot. Simple, 4 abilities, and that's going to be the majority that you are pressing, right? In general, you want to, when it comes to how many wounds do you want to stay at, first of all, never press Festering Strike if you're at 4 or more wounds. That can have, Festering Strike generates 2 to 3 randomly. So if you're at 4, you use Festering Strike, that can bring us up to 7, but the cap is 6, so that would overcap, essentially waste a wound application. Don't want to do that, so only Festering Strike when you're at 3, 2, 1, or 0 wounds. Otherwise you use Scourge Strike to go back down. Right. There's not much else to it. Like, there's much of this like fancy gameplay when it comes to managing your Festamite buff and whatever, but that doesn't really matter. It's all about, just generate those wounds, burst them, use Death Call, keep up your dot. That's it. Cool. So let's talk about cooldowns, because I think this is where the tricky part of Unholy comes into play. Essentially because of the sheer magnitude of cooldowns we have. Luckily, they kind of group up nicely. So the Unholy Death Knight single target rotation comes into this 45-second kind of interval. So every 45 seconds, you're going to press some cooldowns, right? And then there's going to be core rotation going on, and then 45 seconds later, you press some cooldowns and so on. Here's a really nice graphic of what that looks like, right? Our cooldowns are the following, right? We got Army of the Dead, Summon Gargle, Dark Transformation, Unholy Blight, Apocalypse, Unholy Assault, Empower Rune Weapon, right? There's 7 cooldowns to use. However, when you look at this graph up here, very simple to use them, right? You want to use everything on pull. 45 seconds after, we use Blight, Dark Transformation, and Apocalypse. 45 seconds after that point, we use Blight, Dark Transformation, Apocalypse, and Unholy Assault. Another 45 seconds goes, we use Blight, DT, Apocalypse. And then at the 3-minute mark again, we use everything again. Okay? Very simple kind of way to look at it. This does require you to be very adamant about actually pressing your cooldowns when they come up. It's one of the biggest mistakes I see is that people have the Dark Transformation ready and they just don't press it. That's going to mess up this, right? Because if you delay every cooldown 10 seconds, at the 3-minute mark, it won't be aligning again. So you're going to have to end up delaying that and you might lose out casts overall. Anyway, that's kind of the vibe. So very simple. Just take that image, right? Save it somewhere. Go, okay, this is exactly how my cooldown is going to look like. There are some requirements here. So Apocalypse, you need to have 4 or more wounds on the target when you actually press that. Each wound summons a ghoul. So if you have 3 or 2, that's just going to give you 2 ghouls and you lose out a lot of that power. Otherwise, you just press them. With Unholy Blight, that's going to replace your Outbreak quite a lot of the time. So Unholy Blight also applies to Plague. So it's just going to mean that instead of pressing Outbreak every 45 seconds, you're going to do Unholy Blight. You still need to use 1 Outbreak in between each window, but still, that's going to replace a lot of those casts. Cool. Now, that's the CD timings. Let's talk about how your rotation changes once you press your cooldowns. And there's only really one cooldown that affects this. It is Summon Gargle. This is like the primary way you can optimize the damage as an Unholy Death Knight. It's about maximizing the damage of that Summon Gargle. Simply put, once you press that ability, you're going to want to use Death Call as the #1 priority in your rotation. So whenever you get more than 30 runic power, you're going to press that Death Call. That's kind of like the main change. Usually you just kind of press Death Call to avoid overcapping, but when Gargle is out, you're going to press that Death Call like, you know, you really, really want to press that Death Call. That's pretty much it. I will talk, so the opener is going to be a major part of discussion here, because that kind of tells you exactly what to press in your cooldown window. I know it's a bit vague here, yeah, you press your cooldowns, spend your runic power kind of vibe, but when you look at opener, it's going to be very clear exactly how we execute this. One final note, the core rotation does change when you pick up Soul Reaper. This is a talent that we run in single target. When a target is below 35% health, you can press that, and after 5 seconds, you can explode and deal a lot of damage. So in the core rotation, you get one more button, and that's going to be Soul Reaper. You press it when you know that the target is going to end up below 35% health when it explodes. So if you want to be really min-max, you would use the first one at like 36, 37% health, depending on how quickly the boss is dropping. Right, that's the single target rotation. As I said, look at that graphic. That's going to help you a lot with the TD timings and just to keep track of everything you need to press. There's a lot of cooldowns in there, but when you get used to it, it won't feel that bad, I promise you. I want to do a quick note, since we talk about raiding, there will be ads in raiding. How do you deal with those? Well, whenever there are ads, you pop down your Death Decay. That's kind of like a cleave enabling ability. Makes your Scourge Strike cleave, and you're just going to spam Scourge Strike. So for instance, in your current tier, if you look at Sarkareth, when the ads spawn, you pop down Death Decay, and then you just press every single button being Scourge Strike, or Clone Shadows in this case, because that's what talent would take up. Great. Let's move on to the opener. So, what does that look like? Here it is. Very much set in stone. You can see we start out with Army. This is an important thing here. The 4 set will reset if you use Army before you go into combat. So make sure, you can even make sure you can press Outbreak before Army, just to make 100% sure you're actually in combat before you press that ability. Otherwise it's going to ruin your opener DPS when you have the 4 set. Right, follow up with a Festering Strike, just to generate some runic power. Go into Death Decay. We use Death Decay here because we want to benefit from the haste. It comes from a talent we pick up on Holy Ground. We go Dark Transformation and Summon Gargle, and then we'll just spam 4 Death Coils you might be using 3 unless you get a proc, right? So it's 3 or 4, but no more. And then you go Unholy Sword, Apocalypse. This is to start buffing that gargle, right? Unholy Sword gives you haste, Empower Weapon, put that in there. Apocalypse, initiation of Festimite window, right? Generates more runing power. And then you're just going to spend runing power as much as possible. Once the first FNK runs out, use the second one. At this point, also use your ratio ability like Berserking. And if you have a trinket like Vial of Animated Blood, Iridius Fragment, that also goes at this point. Vial actually goes with Unholy Sword, should be used a bit earlier, but Iridius Fragment should be used with that Berserking 15 seconds before Gargle finishes. And then you just, keep spending that runing power and pray that your Gargle crits at the last couple of casts. That's how we do it. At the 3-minute mark, you take this order and you do the exact same thing. It's quite tricky to set that up properly, but it's very important that you try and execute the 3-minute burst in the same way that you execute the opener. It's the ideal kind of way of doing it. A note is that without Bloodlust, you want to use 3 Death Calls, not 4. That's one change there. 4 Death Call only works when you have Bloodlust, so you have enough haste to get that going. Alright, that's the opener for you. Now let's talk about Mythic Plus. All of that is raiding, right? How you optimize for raiding, how you do raiding. Mythic Plus is a whole other thing, right? It's really much different compared to the single target raid rotation. First of all, the build we're running is a disease build. This deals damage in a couple of ways. First of all, dot damage. So Virulent Plague will be one of your top damaging abilities. This is because we pick up stuff like Epon Fever, increases dot damage, and Plaguebringer increases dot damage, right? So that's a huge thing. So in Mythic Class, you always want to make sure everything is dotted up, because that's a huge source of your DPS. You also want to make sure your Plaguebringer is up. So Scourge Strike, that's going to be pressed at least every 10 seconds. When I look at people doing Mythic Plus and they tell me, all right, my damage is low, I ask them, all right, what's your Plaguebringer uptime? If it's below 30%, if it's below 90%, you're doing something wrong. It should be 90% plus. Right. Next source of damage, Epidemic. Epidemic is your primary button that you're pressing in Mythic Plus. It's going to be by far the most common one, and it's going to be the one that you get the most damage from. And a lot of about what we do in Mythic Plus is generating runing power to spend on Epidemic. That's kind of like the whole point. Finally, we have Defile. I'm sorry, but Defile is really good in Mythic Plus. You won't see anything on the ground, but it's just really good. So if you want to do good damage, you have to pick it. Maintaining your Defile Mastery buff, you get that from a mob stand in your Defile, is another target of Mythic Plus. And like in most pools, you'll have that throughout the pool by just reusing Defile multiple times in that pool. That's kind of it. Those are like the the high level. What I do in Mythic Plus? Well, you keep up your dots, you keep up your Plaguebringer, use Epidemic, make sure you have Defile. That's it. Let's look at what that actually looks like on like a given pack. So up here, that's like the Mythic Plus opener. You can see we start out as we run towards the pack, we put down Defile on top of the pack, get that mastery buff going, and it allows us that when we get in range, we can get a cleaved Scourge Strike and everything. It being cleaved doesn't matter that much, but it's still nice extra DPS. Plaguebringer is a buff on you, so you don't need to actually hit everything with Scourge Strike. But anyway, Scourge Strike goes, you go Unholy Blight to get that dot going, you do Dark Transformation, and then all other cooldowns you have available to you, like Unholy Assault, Apocalypse, Abomination Limb, Empower Weapon. Just use everything there. After this point, dump your runing power from Epidemic, and then pop down your next Defile. This is going to be roughly the point where your first Defile is running out, so to your next one, use Scourge Strike. After this point, right, you're going to press really 3 buttons. It's going to be Defile, it's going to be Scourge Strike, and it's going to be Epidemic, right? You don't need to care about wounds. The wounds you get are generated from your pet. Using Festing Strike really has little value. It's much better to just do raw cleave with Scourge Strike there. So what you do is you hit Scourge Strike. When you're saying your Defile, if your Defile runs out, you pop it again, and then use Epidemic to spend all that runing power you generate. That's it, right? That's how it works. If a pack lives for a really long time, you might end up running out of Defiles to use. At that point, just kind of go back to your normal core single target rotation, but use Epidemic instead of Deathfall. But that generally doesn't happen, so don't need to be too bothered about that. By the way, for optimal Defile usage, you want to reuse Defile when the last buff is just about to run out. Doing that way allows you to chain 4 Defiles in a row and get like a really long mastery buff. That's not the most important part to worry about. When it comes to single target in raid, it's the same thing as in single target. It's not as complicated because you won't be running some gargoyle. So you essentially just go in, press army, and then just use all the cooldowns, and then you just continue with normal rotation. Nothing too fancy there, right? It doesn't really matter that much. Alright, so that's the beginner guide for the Unholy Death Knight in Temple 1. I hope that was approachable, the right level of kind of detail. I will make a advanced rotation video talking about like Festamite gameplay, stuff like that, where you can like kind of do some tiny additional optimizations to you know, squeeze out a little more DPS. Leave a comment down below, let me know what you thought about this video. Upvote, downvote, consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.